I feel like I've been going through a life review. You know, it's a funny thing. There have been times in my life when I was in a certain phase of life that I completely forgot about all the other phases. I've had a lot of amnesia in my life in various ways. And I am understanding that this is intended, that it's planned this way. And there have been times in recent years where I couldn't really remember my life. I had forgotten so much. And then sometimes things come back to me and I remember, oh yeah, I did that. Both good and bad. Recently, the other day, I was remembering the pain of some things, which I don't think of very often now. And in making these videos, I've been sharing some things that I'm happy about that I did in my life, ways that I blessed others, artwork that I made, insights that I had. And I had forgotten about a lot of those too. And it seems to me that for me and probably many others, our life here becomes very compartmentalized to where we're given the opportunity to see something up close, to focus on a certain aspect of life, a certain time in our lives, and nothing else. It's like everything else disappears. And for that time, we're just focused on that little tiny room we're in, that little box. And I'm sure that serves a very good purpose because I'm becoming more aware all the time right now that we are multidimensional beings, that everything is going on simultaneously, that there is actually no past and future exactly because it's all happening at once. And we as spirit beings can go into the past or the future or the present. It becomes the present when we go into it and experience it. And there are also levels where we can experience it all at the same time or experience many things at the same time because it's all connected. And I get that. It's kind of funny, you know. We spend time as a human getting used to a linear perspective. And yet somehow, when I heard the idea that it was all happening at once, I felt that I could understand that I could grasp that in some way. And it's funny because the last 9 years, ever since I came back from Hawaii, I returned from Hawaii in 2016 to Albuquerque, New Mexico, and I got to see my mother for several months before she passed. I arrived at the end of August and she passed in December 8th. And it was a beautiful passing. And I was able to love her completely at that time. I had done healing in myself and completely let go of anything I had against her, the way that she had raised me, treated me when I was young. And I was just full of love for her, and every time I saw her, I was able to express that to her and communicate that to her, and sometimes she was a bit baffled by it because she still had feelings of unworthiness and didn't quite understand why I loved her so much. Couldn't quite let it all in, and yet I know that she did receive it. And at that point, it almost felt more like, I was the mother and she was the child in certain ways. But then she passed, and I inherited the house that she had there. I had moved into it as soon as I got there because she was living in a care facility, a little home. And my sister had been taking care of her and overseeing all of that. And I began, when she passed, maybe even before that. Anyway, I began going through all her things. It was a house full of her stuff, and it was all still there. And so part of my service to our family was to kind of deal with a lot of her physical effects, her clothes and possessions and all that kind of thing. And my sister had done so much in actually caring for her for the years that she was declining. And so this was something I could do because I love organizing things. So I was happy to do it, and I love getting rid of things and giving things away. So that was what I did. But it was so interesting because in moving into her house, I felt like I took on her life in certain ways. I began acting more like her and doing things that had never been true of me. Like I became very neat, and I kept the house very orderly, and I did my dishes immediately after when I would make things. In fact, I would cook for myself and do the dishes before I even ate the food. And previously, I had been the complete opposite of that. Before that, I would just leave everything till later, and I didn't necessarily have neat environments, and especially when I had kids, my house was quite chaotic because I didn't like cleaning, and I also didn't like making other people clean, and so, I barely kept up with things like that. But it was so funny how living in my mother's house, I took on things in a certain way, and I felt like I was on a very similar path to her. I had watched her decline and die, and I felt like I had an understanding of that was going to happen to me too. That watching her die made me realize that I too was going to die, and I could see my body going down the same road she had gone down. It wasn't as far down the path as she had gone, but I was on that path. And it was so interesting in like handling money. I had never liked being responsible for, I had never owned a house because I didn't really want to be responsible for that, for the care and maintenance of a house. And I didn't like dealing with money. And yet I was in a position of needing to do that. And so I was doing it, I was fulfilling my obligations, and I now had more money to spend than I had ever had before. Because again, I really didn't like money, and I didn't like um, spending a lot of money. But I was doing more of that than I ever had before. And my mother loved to spend money. She had quite a bit of it, and she loved luxury, and she bought the best quality things, and she loved beauty and elegance and all of that. And so, as I was in this position of feeling like I was living her life in some ways, I was still me, and I was still doing things that she would have never done, like painting her turquoise curtains red with fabric paint and rearranging her furniture and changing the house around to suit me. But it gave me an understanding, a better understanding of my mother than I had ever had before. And I was able to forgive my parents in certain ways for things that I had judged them for. I had judged them for their love of luxury and things, because as a child I had felt like they valued things more than people, and that bothered me. I didn't like that. And so I judged them for that, and I determined that I was not going to be that way. I was going to be different from my parents. But as I was living in her house, I came to better understand and accept that it was okay to love things. It doesn't have to be either or. You can love people and love things, and enjoy things and appreciate beauty and all of that. And so I just was able to accept my parents more and to kind of understand it from the inside out instead of just looking at them from the outside, which I had done when I was younger. I could feel from the inside something of what their life felt like. And I also ended up going through a lot of my mother's writings. My mother was a spiritual person. She and my father both explored psychological ideas. At the times when they lived, they read books like I'm Okay, You're Okay, and they both went to therapy, and they both worked on themselves, and they both had spiritual practices and experiences. And my mother had kept journals and had written about her life, and I read a lot of those things, and I was already aware of those things, but sort of got a more intimate look at her life. And I remember, it's funny that I didn't expect to talk about this today. I thought I was talking about something a little different, but here we go. So I remember the day that my mother passed. She was in this home, and they called my sister and told her that Mom had been, unresponsive, and was they thought that she was on her way out, and so it was like overnight. And then that morning my sister came and told me that my mother had passed. And I just felt this elation. I was just so happy for her because, my whole life really I had the sense that we go to heaven and that everything's much better there than here. And so I couldn't really feel sad because, again, I had already worked through whatever issues I had with my mother. I didn't need her to be physically here. And I was just so happy for her that she had made that transition. It felt like a birth to me, you know. Sometimes, I mean, dying is very similar to birth, and the body has to sort of work at it. She had done that, and she was free, and I was so happy for her. And I had actually had a conversation with her a couple years before she died, and I asked her, when you go to the other side, will you be my angel? And she had said yes. So we had, we had similar beliefs about that. And even though she didn't talk about her spiritual life very often, but I had a sense of what it was, and I could identify with it. And I knew that she believed in angels and things like that. But the funny thing is, so I went to see her body at the home that morning. My sister and I both went. And when I walked into the room and I saw her body laying on her bed, it was like, wow, she's out of here. She's gone. She's a million miles away. And, I knew that she struggled with being here, and that she didn't really like a lot of things about life. I mean, I think I inherited, certainly there were family lineage things that I inherited, and one of them was really sort of a disdain for the physical and for being human, and just wanting to be in the spirit world. And I could just see she was just gone from that body. There was nothing of her left in that body. And I think that's not necessarily always true. I think that some people, their spirit does linger a little bit more in their body when they leave it, but not her. Like, I could just feel how far gone she was. And it's funny because, like, even though I asked her to be my angel, and I'm sure she is, I really don't sense her much around me. And I think she's just off doing her own thing. And I think I don't necessarily need much from her these days. I'm my own angel in a lot of ways, and that's been something I've really focused on in the last few years, is just being my own nurturer, my own guide, just bringing my higher self into my body and my life and into relationship with my inner child. And so it was a very interesting experience. And the other thing was, I went close to her body, and I touched her a little bit, gently and tenderly, with love. But I just had this sense that even though she was completely gone from that body, that there was a sacredness to that body, that I should treat it the same way I would have if she was still in it. That it wasn't just a piece of meat. It was a temple. I don't know that these words came to me at that time, but they are now. That her body was a sacred temple, and I should not desecrate it in any way. I should be very respectful toward it, just seeing it or touching it. So that was also an interesting experience. And again, when I was reading her writings from her life, I had this sense that I was being made privy to her inner thoughts, and that I needed to tread lightly and to be respectful and to honor, and not to just read them as if not to be a gossip, but to take them seriously, and to honor the fact that even though she wasn't here anymore, that she was allowing me in some way to share in very intimate and personal details of her life, and that too was a sacred privilege for me to be doing. So I see that this video is getting very long. I don't like to make videos too long these days, but I think I'll end it here because it has gotten this long, and I think I have more to say today, but I'll put that in a separate video. So thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.